Rainbow Reflections, Book 1, A Kind of Magic. Chapter 14, Headlong. The Day of Spirits wasn't fun. Everyone was so worried that Ren would collapse in agonizing pain again that they didn't dare leave the tower, remaining in the family room most of the day. Hyaktu reminded the teens that they weren't allowed to leave the school, though he didn't punish Ren for doing so, as she had a valid reason, even if it ended up being a false alarm. Frost stopped by the tower a bit later in the morning, but Hyaktu turned him away, telling him that Ren was sick and they wouldn't be doing anything to celebrate the holiday. Sorala and Zin watched him go with satisfied expressions on their faces. Both of them knew Ren could do better than him. That Sunday passed very slowly, and Sorala was quite happy to see Moonday arrive. She and Zin walked on either side of Ren as they went to breakfast and then to magic studies. Frost tried to approach, but Sorala sent him a glare that stopped him in his tracks. Sorala didn't pay much attention to Khurshid and magic studies, her concern for Ren turning into concern for the obstacle course challenge. She hadn't practiced over the weekend, given everything that had happened. Twirling her rough hair around her finger, she ran through the obstacle course in her mind's eye, hoping that she'd still be able to accomplish her ideas. The first years made to move for the magic channeling classroom after magic studies, but Khurshid stopped them.
"We'll be doing the obstacle creation outside,"
he told them.
"Can someone help me move the cauldrons out?"
Once the cauldrons were in the courtyard, Khurshid summoned the students forward. They clustered around him, most of them anxious about the challenge as they shifted their weight uneasily or whispered to their friends.
"As I said last week, you have to make your own obstacle course based off of your elemental magic. Your course must run for at least 2 minutes. You will be demonstrating to me that you understand how to move the elements around you. Nobody needs to run through the obstacle course you create."
The students nodded to his words.
"We'll start with the Earth group,"
Khurshid continued.
"Which of you would like to go first?"
Sorala, Raimugi, and Ebony all looked over at Bana, who took the first turn every time. She tossed her orange hair over her shoulder and moved ahead, raising her wand in front of her. Khurshid slid forward and thrust his palms at the 4 cauldrons in front of him. Each cauldron moved in a different direction until they shaped a long rectangle. He signaled to the space bordered by cauldrons.
"That's where your obstacle course must be contained. We can't have you throwing rocks into windows,"
he said, smiling lightly. Sorala huffed in annoyance. She knew he was referring to her. Nobody else had caused any accidents in class. There were a few small burns amongst the fire magicians, but nothing more serious than that. Bana approached the obstacle course as Khurshid took out his mirror. He told the mirror to set a timer for 2 minutes, then started it when Bana was ready. The moment the timer began, Bana swished her wand about, ordering her magic to shift the stones in the cauldron nearest her. The stones came out and landed at the start of the rectangle, where they then rose up and down with loud thuds that shook the ground, as if blocking a person from proceeding. She then made the stones stack into one large boulder, which zigzagged through the middle of the course, as if trying to crush someone. At the end, Bana's boulder separated into multiple stones with sharp points. She flung these at the finish line, where they stabbed the ground, creating a dust cloud upon impact.
"Nicely done, Bana, but you did that in only 1 minute,"
Khurshid told her.
"I'll have to take a few points off."
Bana looked disappointed, but said nothing as she returned to the other students. Raimugi then stepped forward to take her place, always eager to show off what they could do with their magic. They did something similar to Bana's obstacle course, except that they made many little boulders roll across the path to trip anyone going through. Raimugi almost hit the 2-minute mark, but was still short. Sorala went next, knowing that Ebony would want to go last. Lifting her wand in front of her, she saw her obstacle course idea in her mind one last time. The moment Khurshid commanded her to go, she was ready.
"Build a wall,"
Sarala ordered her wand, and the stones shifted together to form a tall wall at the beginning of the obstacle course. Once she judged enough time had passed for a person to either climb over the wall or simply go around it, she pointed her wand at the stone again. "Shake the ground. Become pebbles." The ground began vibrating at the same time that the wall broke apart into tiny stones. The pebbles then rolled around on the shaking ground, ready to trip anyone stumbling across. After several seconds passed, she stopped the earthquaking. "Rise up," she snapped briskly. The stone ground then shot up at random points, the edges as sharp as blades. Sarala did not want to see what would happen if someone stepped in the wrong spot at the wrong time. They'd probably lose their foot, or worse. "Make a punching wall." The stones stacked together into another wall near the end of the obstacle course, but this time the structure was moving instead of being still. Some parts of the wall launched forward with a loud scraping sound, while the rest of the wall remained motionless. If Sarala had to cross her own obstacle course, she didn't know how she'd be able to do it. She allowed the punching wall to last for several seconds before dropping the spell entirely. Sarala then looked over at Khurshid, wondering if she had made it in the time limit. Though the mirror had been counting aloud in an automated voice, she had been too focused on her magic to pay any attention to it.
"Excellent job, Sarala,"
Khurshid said, nodding to her.
"You made it just over 2 minutes. I also like what you did with the pebbles. Making the stone so tiny is a difficult task, and to move them all individually from there is extraordinary. You are skilled to be able to pull it off."
Sarala smiled briefly before returning to the other students. "That was so good," Ren complimented her as Ebony took his turn. "I suppose it was okay," Sarala said carelessly with a shrug, though she was glowing with pride inside. "I'd hate to do your obstacle course," Zin said. "All those rocks could kill." "Isn't that the point of an obstacle course?" Sarala asked. Ren and Zin exchanged a glance. Once the Earth students were done, Khurshid called up the Water students. The courtyard was so wet afterwards, but it didn't last long. The Fire students heated up the stone and made the water evaporate quickly. The Air students went last. "Should I go first?" Zin asked Ren in a quiet voice, so only Sarala could hear. "Just to get it over with? Or do you want to go first and have more energy for yours?" "I'll go first," Ren said. "I'm still a bit shaky from yesterday." But she was too slow. C3 had already stepped forward. His course mostly consisted of sending large wind blasts in all directions, which was annoying as each wave managed to toss Sarala's hair around and send shivers down her spine. Once he was done, Murneo hurried to go, sending swirls of air around the rectangle and thankfully keeping it contained. Ren then stepped up and pulled out her wand. She made an air wall much like Sarala's in the beginning of the course, followed by mini tornadoes crisscrossing each other. After, she created multiple air slides, which would pick up a person and send them back to the beginning. Finally, she ended the course with a tornado, but it was under superb control, and didn't even move outside the rectangle or tug at any of the nearby garden plants. The tornado dropped with her wand.
"Excellent control,"
Khurshid praised her.
"Good timing, too."
Ren beamed and returned to Sarala and Zin at the back of the group. Zin moved forward with her wand as Ren lifted her own once more. "Still nothing?" Sarala commented under her breath. Ren shook her head in reply. "Why don't you just tell your dad already?" Sarala asked. "It'd be better for the both of you." But Ren shook her head again, her eyes glinting. Zin spoke loudly as she waved her wand, clearly for Ren's benefit to hear her at the back of the crowd. She ordered her wand, or Ren, to make a mini tornado of air that would keep a person from advancing forward. Ren did so, then changed the air into a large wave at Zin's command. The final move was supposed to be a wall of wind pushing the person back to the start, but Ren accidentally made the wind run in the same direction it was going, away from the gathered students and towards the end of the course instead of against them.
That was a bit short on the clock.
Kershid told Zin as she lowered her wand.
And that final move would have sent our imaginary person over the finish line, not send them back to the beginning.
I know, Zin muttered. I just got it wrong. Kershid pursed his lips.
You seem to be taking from the air behind us, too, rather than directly around you. I felt wind at the back of my neck the whole time.
Zin's eyes widened for a moment, but she quickly masked it and said, I thought that powered up more, like winding up a toy. Kershid frowned thoughtfully.
That's not a bad idea, especially if your magic isn't as strong.
Zin scowled, but made no other reply as she rejoined her sister and friend. Sorry, Ren hissed in a whisper. Zin shrugged, seeming too dejected to speak.
Class dismissed,
Kershid announced. Ren raised her hand, looking alarmed. Mr. Jihan, what about homework? Kershid smiled in her direction.
The homework is the same thing. Perfect your obstacle courses for next week.
The first year still had a few minutes before their plants class, so they took their time crossing the cool courtyard to the greenhouse. Saralahan at the very back of the group with Ren and Zin. At least we have more time to get the obstacle course right, Zin, Ren said. We didn't practice over the weekend, but now I know what you want, so I can do it properly. Zin sighed. Don't bother, Ren, she muttered. I'll just tell Dad. But there's no point in hiding it, Zin said, looking up at her sister. I'm not going to get anywhere if we keep this up. Ren! Sorala glared as Frost came running over. Raimugi and Morneo stood a bit farther away, watching their friend in dismay. Hey, Frost, Ren said, wiping the frown from her freckled face quickly. What happened yesterday? I went to your tower, but your dad said you were sick and told me to leave. You look fine to me, Frost added, a bit suspiciously. It was just a really bad headache, Ren said brightly, pushing her glasses up. Anyway, there'll be plenty of chances to spend time together. Frost nodded. That's true, but I got all dressed up for the holiday. Well, the Moon Festival will be here soon, and the Moonlight Dance, Ren said. Frost grinned. That's right. I forgot that school rule handout mentioned a winter dance. So we're going together? Yep, Ren said. Then we can dress up and have tons of fun. The minute bell rang, and the students hurried to the muggy greenhouse. Sorala kept sending glares at Frost, wishing he'd just leave her friend alone. But Ren didn't seem to mind his hand on her shoulder as they entered the thicket of plants, nor how he kept talking about himself. She must have all the patience in the world to put up with that arrogant idiot, Sorala thought irritably. If that fool bragged about himself to me all day, I'd just punch him in the face. That'd mess up his looks and give him one less thing to brag about, at least. As was usual, the class was studying plants. They were almost halfway through the first floor of the greenhouse, but there were still so many plants to cover. There were even bushes and flowers that grew on the trees, so they'd have to climb up to the other levels to take a look at those plants, too. The class was getting repetitive with drawing plants and listening to lectures on those plants. Though most of the class still found these sessions to be interesting, Sorala was growing bored of them. She would usually scribble a few words she heard and copy Ren's work later. But this time, she was completely distracted, watching Ren and Frost several feet away. She shook her head and stared out the window to the forest bordering the school, forcing her thoughts to the tree walking near the glass house instead. Sorala was eager for Kung Fu class that afternoon. She had already learned all of her yellow sash material, and she was quite confident that she'd be able to test for her green sash. She often practiced during her free days, doing more Kung Fu than homework. Hyaktu started the class, breaking the students into two groups, white sashes and yellow sashes. The yellow sashes were gaining more members each week, as the last white sashes tested.
Does any white sash want to test today?
Hyaktu asked the remaining white sashes. Zin and Ren, both still white sashes, stepped forward. "We will," they said in unison.
"Me too,"
Sarala said as she approached, straightening the yellow sash tied around her uniform vest. Hyaktu glanced over at her in surprise.
"You've only been working on the yellow sash material for a few weeks. It typically takes a few months," he told her.
"I want to test," she repeated, clenching her jaw. Hyaktu shrugged.
"Anyone has the chance to test, so long as they know all of their material. I'll test these two for now. Practice your material in the meantime."
Sarala nodded and hurried to one of the private training rooms off the large mat, leaving the door partially opened so she could listen to what was happening beyond. While Hyaktu tested the twins, Khurshid, the assistant teacher in the Kung Fu classes, taught the yellow sashes their new material. Not all students had to listen to Khurshid, though, and some went to train on their own. Each of the students were able to approach Hyaktu or Khurshid at any point if they had questions. Sarala practiced her kicks and self-defense techniques for about 30 minutes until Hyaktu called her name. Sweaty and panting lightly, she left the room to see that Zin and Ren now had yellow sashes gleaming around their waists. The sisters beamed at her as the other students applauded them.
"Are you still wishing to test?"
Hyaktu asked Sarala.
"Yes,"
she said firmly.
"Then let's begin,"
Hyaktu said. Sarala nodded and took her place on one side of the large mat, which was reserved for tests when they occurred. She bowed to Hyaktu, as was custom to open the test, then waited for him.
"Wheel kick,"
Hyaktu ordered. Tests started with the current level of kicks. She performed the 7 kicks required at that level, putting extra snap behind each strike like she was kicking down a door for each. Once she was done, she stood feet together to wait for the next instruction.
"First half of the techniques,"
Hyaktu said briskly. Sarala nodded, knowing she'd have 2 chances for each technique. The techniques put her in specific scenarios, such as a chokehold or an opponent trying to kick her while she was on the floor, which she had to defend against and then take down the pretend opponent. Sarala imagined a red-clad enemy in front of her the entire time, spiking her adrenaline so she could perform the techniques hastily and with as much power as she could muster. Everything was done in the air, as Hyaktu didn't use the blocker bat or mitts like he did for the white to yellow tests.
"You can take a water break now, if you'd like,"
Hyaktu told her as she stood at the ready once more.
"I'm fine,"
Sarala panted heavily, sweat pouring down her skin like she had just gone swimming.
"Very well. Show me your form."
The yellow sash level was different from the white sash level in that it also had a hand form added onto the techniques and kicks. Forms were like several self-defense techniques put together with repeated motions to have students practice the same thing continuously to master the strikes. The yellow sash form was a series of straight strikes and blocks linked together with a few kicks. Sarala performed it, now panting so much that she didn't know if she'd pass out. Hyaktu gave her a small break before she moved on to the second half of the techniques, for which she was grateful despite not wanting it. After she was done with the next techniques, which had a little less power than before, her muscles now screaming at her to slow down, she showed off her 6 white sash level kicks. The students had to perform each kick they learned on their tests, no matter what level they were. The last kicks nearly took it out of her, though. Her lungs screeched in pain, and her breath rattled in her chest.
"Get your kickboxing gear on,"
Hyaktu told her briskly.
"Frost, you too. You'll be sparring Sarala."
Sarala forgot how tired she was the moment she heard Frost's name. If her body didn't feel so numb, she might have smiled at the opportunity to strike him down. Wondering briefly if Hyaktu also didn't like Frost dating Ren, she hurried to the closet. She grabbed her sparring gear, which was kept in a pink bag with her name on it, pulling it on over her uniform and pushing past Frost as she returned to the big mat. Frost darted in and out of the closet for his gear too, looking excited that he was going to help out with the first green sash test. No matter what Hyaktu's intentions might have been for setting up Sarala with Frost, he was a good opponent for her. Both of them were broad-shouldered and had good power behind their strikes. Sorella eyed the boy as they lined up across from each other in the center of the mat, both holding their gloved fists up at the ready. "You know the rules from our Kung Fu 1B class," Hyaktu said. "Hit to the chest protector only. Don't hit too hard. Now bow to each other and tap gloves. You have 2 minutes. Go!" Sorella darted forward, lifting her left leg to throw a snap kick at Frost. He blocked the kick, but she had intended for that to happen. As her leg was cast to the side, she slammed her fist into Frost's chest. The air was knocked out of him, and he staggered back. But she didn't give him any time to recover. Ignoring Hyaktu's second rule, she pummeled Frost with punch after punch, throwing in a kick or two when she remembered. The power sent rippling vibrations up her arms and coursing through her body, encouraging her to hit even harder with the next strike and the next. She didn't give Frost much chance to do anything but block, throwing her punches as quickly as she could. She was rapidly out of breath, but she kept forcing herself all the same. If she stepped back, she knew Frost would be upon her, throwing his own strike, and he'd knock the remaining air out of her. "And time!" Hyaktu called out loudly, throwing a mitt between the kickboxers. Sorella staggered away from Frost, completely out of breath. Her chest ached so badly, she thought her lungs had been pierced. A painful stitch had formed in her side, making her wonder if she'd somehow bruised her ribs on one of Frost's blocks. The squishy mat glistened with her sweat, which might as well have been the size of the pond in the courtyard. "Bow to each other to close up the match," Hyaktu said. Sorella and Frost bowed once more, tapping their gloves. "Now close the test with me, Sorella." Sorella bowed to Hyaktu, who returned the action. "Gear down. And please, get a drink of water." Sorella returned to the closet. She peeled the sweaty gloves clean to her hands, then took off her helmet, chest protector, and groin guard. She nearly forgot to take the shin guards off until Frost reminded her as he took off his own. "Next time, hit lighter," he added as she left the closet. Sorella was soon standing before Hyaktu once more, still sweaty and breathing heavily. Hyaktu surveyed her calmly for a minute before speaking. "You have definitely been working hard the past few weeks. I don't think I've ever held a second test so quickly. I admire your determination and hard work, but don't rush through the next level. I expect at least 1 month of training before you beg for another test." "I didn't beg," Sorella thought indignantly. "You fought hard in the sparring match, but I do ask that you tone down your power a bit," Hyaktu continued. "You need to focus more on moving around and being more tricky, throwing more fakes and kicks. But you did well. Take a step back. I've got a new sash for you," Hyaktu said, smiling. Sorella stepped back as Hyaktu came closer. She untied her yellow sash from around her waist, almost forgetting about this part of the ceremony. She then took off the sash and folded it as neatly as she could, her fingers trembling the whole time. With the tips pointing to the right, she handed the sash to Hyaktu with both hands. Hyaktu took the yellow sash and pocketed it in his robe, then took a green sash from a different pocket. He waited for her to bow to him again before passing the sash to her. She tied the green sash around her waist, her hands still fumbling in her exhaustion. At long last, she had it tied. Hyaktu then bowed to her, and she quickly mirrored the action. The other students applauded her, Ren and Zin the loudest amongst them. Sorella grinned around at them all, proud that she had leveled up, and beat up Frost a bit along the way.